So there you are watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha, and the Daily Mail's deputy political editor, Harriet Line. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight, so welcome to both of you. As ever, let's check out the front pages, shall we? Starting with the Metro, with the striking headline, Ring of Fire. The Metro covering the blazes stretching from France to Algeria. The Telegraph leading with the NatWest chief executive, Dame Alison Rose's admission that she was the source for the BBC's story about Nigel Farage's banking affairs. How can Alison Rose keep her job amid the Farage furore? That's the question the Daily Express poses. The Financial Times, meanwhile, understands that Rishi Sunak intends to attract the votes of landlords by loosening the environmental regulations with which their properties have to comply. And according to the Eye, the policy which forces manufacturers to pay for recycling could also be scrapped. The Guardian reports that the UN wants smartphones banned in schools for the sake of children's well-being. And the Star has the story of a pig whose owners claim she's a talented artist and has made them more than £1 million. Well, don't forget, scan that QR code that you see on screen during the programme and you can check out for yourselves the front pages of the papers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to them, to Sonia and Harriet. Welcome to both of you. Once again, Sonia, you know, the fires in southern Europe and indeed northern Africa making the front pages, including the Metro, now calling it a ring of fire.
Absolutely, and I think that the scale of these fires is really extremely alarming. There's a number of angles that the papers are covering this from. There's obviously the angle of what's been happening with British tourists, for example, on the Greek island of Rhodes. These fires are affecting other very popular holiday destinations. But when you zoom out, there's also the question of the link with climate change and carbon emissions. And the scientific consensus is very much that this level of heat wave would not be happening. I mean, it's almost impossible to think of this happening without man-made climate change. And so I think, unfortunately, this is one of the consequences that we are going to be seeing occur more frequently. Scientists say, you know, we could be looking at experiencing these heat waves in southern Europe every 2 to 5 years. There are a number of factors, these record temperatures that we've been seeing in Sicily, you know, records broken by more than 2 degrees, temperatures of over 47 degrees in some parts of Sicily, and the fact that you've got lots of very dry vegetation in southern Europe over the summer, creating these kind of fire hazards. And, you know, when you listen to the stories both of holidaymakers who are out there and what it's been like kind of fleeing the immediate danger, but also people who, you know, we've heard about lots of people who've lost their lives in these fires, you know, people really looking at losing their livelihoods, their homes, their businesses, their hotels. You know, the scale of the catastrophe and the destruction is really quite extraordinary, I think. Mm-hmm.
Well, lives lost, including, if we delve inside the Metro, the water-bombing plane which crashed in the hills of Evia, one of the Greek islands now hit by these fires. But as you said, you know, testimony from Brits returning from abroad. There's one. I ran from the fire in my bikini. Kind locals gave me clothes. And right at the bottom, they talk about summer holiday limbo for Britons with trips booked to the burning Isle. About 30,000 would-be holidaymakers are stuck in limbo because of the wildfires on the Greek island of Rhodes, not to mention elsewhere, including Sicily, which looks like it's got in a terrible situation with wildfires as well at the moment. So what's to be done? I mean, Michael Gove's saying, yes, it's safe to go, I'm going. If the government doesn't say anything, Harriet, what you know, people don't get their money back. So there is a limbo, isn't there now?
There is a total limbo. It's a really awful situation for so many families to be in who will have spent hundreds, thousands of pounds on holidays and are now looking at these awful images coming from islands like Rhodes and thinking, I really don't want to go there, but I'm not going to get a refund on my holiday. And if you've got children or you are just excited about that trip, you're not going to get something similar for the same amount of money elsewhere at this short notice. So a lot of people are going because they can't claim a refund because the Foreign Office isn't advising against travel there. And that's the bar that many travel insurance companies will use. It's not just if the place is on fire, it's that the government is saying you can't go. And so until or if the government does that, people are still going to go there because they don't want to miss out on a holiday and all of that money that they have spent. But I mean, Michael Gove said today that he will still be going on holiday, as you referenced, to Evia. And I think many people will. But looking at these images, it's not the sort of place that anyone really wants to be going. And indeed, arguably, many islanders probably there do not want more tourists adding to this chaos on these islands. Though on the flip side, small business owners, hoteliers, etc., there equally don't want governments to ban people from going because that will cripple their businesses. And not all of the island, in a place like Rhodes, is affected. So it's a very, very tricky situation that families are having to decide for themselves what to do.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a dilemma on both sides, as you suggest. And in the meantime, those often ancient olive groves burning, the wildlife there, not able to escape, quite aside from the human part of all of this. And The Guardian, certainly in Tuesday's paper, talked about the link with climate. The climate crisis is undeniable. And doubling down on that on their front page again today in The Guardian, this is climate change, there's no magic defence, quoting the Greek Prime Minister on the front pages, Sonia.
Yes, that's right. And I think people living in Southern Europe are going to be extremely worried going forwards because scientists are predicting that these sorts of temperatures and hence these kinds of wildfires are going to become more common events. And the tricky thing is that big parts of Southern Europe are absolutely dependent on tourism. It's a main industry. If you look at an island like a Greek island like Rhodes, or for example, Sicily, tourism is so important here. And these kinds of events are catastrophic at the time, both for people who live there, people who are holidaying there, but they're also going to have long-term consequences, both on people's perceptions of going on holiday there. But in terms of the landscape, like the kind of environmental damage that is caused by these fires, it doesn't repair itself overnight or even, just in a year. You're talking about really catastrophic damage to wildlife, to local forests, changes to the landscape. So, these are the consequences of the climate crisis. And the issue for us as a sort of human race is that the link sometimes between individual decisions and decisions that governments take, and then these sorts of consequences can sometimes seem quite diffuse. But unless we really get our act together, we are going to be seeing more of these kinds of catastrophic weather events, and more parts of the planet that become essentially, it's not like these bits of Southern Europe become inhabitable, but there are parts of the world that will become inhabitable where people are living at the moment as a result over the next kind of 40 or 50 years. So this is something, I think it's really a warning to us that we have to take it really seriously.
Well, let's take a look at that juxtaposition with policy then, shall we? Two newspapers, the FT and the I, both have a picture story of the wildfire crisis on the top. There's the Financial Times, which pictures Algeria, in fact, where 34 people had died. The wildfires extending now into Tunisia, the paper says as well. And there below it, the idea being floated that Rishi Sunak is ready to overhaul green targets for landlords, the energy efficiency targets to relieve pressure on the housing market. So there's a timing issue, I guess, with some of these stories. But anyway, Harriet, talk us through what the FT is talking about here.
Yeah, it couldn't really be a starker front page, could it, with that horrible burned out shell of a building or a home in Algeria, and then this row amongst Conservative MPs and, well, the Parliament as a whole over how you in the UK tackle the climate emergency and the timing of that, as you say. So the FT is talking about one measure that the government's looking at ripping up. And after the Uxbridge by-election last week, where while the Tories held on to it, it was narrow, and clearly Labour were given a pretty bloody nose as a result of the ULEZ policy. And so I think that's brought these issues into stark contrast about how you deal with policies which are obviously well-meaning, but are going to cost individual households significantly. And the timing of that. So when you've got a cost of living crisis, you've got bills going up, is it really the right time to be slapping a whole load of extra bills on households who are already struggling to deal with what might be seen in some quarters as a bit of a future problem when the net zero target is 2050, not tomorrow. So it's the timing of these policies. The FT talking about the target for landlords to get their properties to category C in their emissions, the energy efficiency rating. And that's a pretty decent level to get to. Again, it's a really well-meaning policy. It's not good for renters to be in inefficient homes where their energy bills are high because they're leaking, all of their warmth out of the windows or whatever. But the cost of doing that can be pretty immense, and obviously is likely to be passed on to the tenants in those properties, again, sort of fueling this issue of inflation and crippling households in the cost of living crisis. So it's one of many policies that seem to be being kicked down the line a little bit by the government, or certainly being considered to be kicked down the line, so that they're not passing these costs on just ahead of an election, where they're likely to end up getting bruised at the polls as a result of them.
Yes, and another one on the front page of the Eye, which also has a picture of fires attempted to be fought at the top there. Blazes taking hold across Greece, Sicily, Turkey, Algeria and Tunisia up the top there. But below it, the story that the flagship eco policy forcing manufacturers to pay for recycling is being booted down the road for a bit, Sonia.
Yes, that's right. So this is another row about green policies within the Conservatives, and this is specifically a scheme that would force manufacturers to pay for the cost of recycling their goods. And the Eye is reporting tonight that there's talk of the Prime Minister delaying bringing this scheme in as well as the regulations for landlords that Harriet just talked about. And I think when you zoom out of this, what's going on within the Conservative Party is, this is one of the big rows. It's that tension between we've got to act now to meet our net zero targets, to avoid the sort of catastrophic climate change and the catastrophic weather events that we're seeing in the fires across southern Europe as we speak, really, but that does carry costs. And I think personally it's extremely short-termist to be saying, well, we just can't afford to do this now, so we're going to push it back and back and back. I mean, governments in some ways may always do that because they like to think about the short term. They like to think about winning elections in 2 to 3 years' time rather than the impact on the climate in 10 to 20 years. I mean,
Harriet, let's go to the Telegraph, shall we? Also the lead story, in fact, for the Daily Express. NatWest, Farage and what might happen next. Take it away.
Yeah, so this is Dame Alison Rose admitting that the NatWest chief that she was the source of the BBC story, which inaccurately claimed that Nigel Farage had lost his account as a result of purely commercial reasons. They were also political, that played a part, his political opinions. And so she has today apologised to Nigel Farage for having leaked some details, although she says, which I think is important to be clear on, that she didn't leak private information. However, somehow Simon Jack, who was sitting next to her at a dinner the night before he broke the story on the BBC, said that night before she broke the story, must have got some kind of information from her in order for him to run the story. So tonight she's saying, I'm sorry, I didn't leak private information, but I did basically overstepped the mark and made an error of judgment. And that has led to a number of calls for her to go. That revelation, I think there's a report in the Times that number 10 wants her to quit, even though she says she's staying and the board at NatWest allegedly has their full confidence in her. I think it's quite difficult to see how her position remains tenable.
Yeah, number 10 wants NatWest boss to quit over Farage. I think The Sun is also reporting that Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, is said to have serious concerns about Dame Alison Rose's handling of the NatWest Coutts Farage affair. You know, presumably she was asked at this dinner. You know, she didn't give numbers, details. Is she OK to keep going, do you think, Sonia? Just quickly.
Well, she's clearly made a serious error of judgment, and she said that herself. Then there's the question of, you know, whether she should resign over it or whether she should get sacked. I'm not sure it's serious enough to mean that she should go. I mean, she definitely did mishandle this. You know, she should not have implied that the decision was taken on a sort of purely commercial basis. But I think, you know, it is probably, you know, people do make mistakes in jobs, and she has apologised. So I do think it's kind of up to the board of NatWest as to her future. And I think it would be, you know, quite harsh in some ways to resign. But I think it raises much bigger questions about, you know, about the sort of basis on which banking services are provided. I'm certainly no fan of Nigel Farage's political views. In fact, I think, you know, some of them are fairly odious. But do I want to live in a society where banks are policing people's political opinions and sort of picking and choosing customers based on their political views? I think that's quite chilling, actually, particularly if you've got a situation where, you know, several banks are turning you down, where one bank turns you down because of that, and then that acts as some kind of red flag for other banks. You know, I don't think we know the full extent to which this is going on, but certainly the details of that report that Coutts did on Nigel Farage, you know, it was clearly a commentary on some of his political views and his suitability as a customer for the bank based on that. They said, you know, this is partly a decision about inclusion and whether he fits with the bank's values. And I quite frankly think that, you know, banks are not there to do politics. They are there to provide services.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a talking point, certainly, hasn't it? Quite a defensive statement from Dame Alison as well, but we will talk more later.